Towards the end of World War I, nearly 800 years of British rule in Ireland came to an end during what was known as the Irish War of Independence, where nationalists, seeking to break away from the wider United Kingdom, used the upheaval of the war in Europe to mount their own campaign against the colonial authorities. What resulted was a guerrilla conflict, fought in both the cities and the countryside, that eventually led to Home Rule being established by the Irish fighters, though in the wake of this outcome, further violence and bloodshed would ensue, occasioned by the subsequent breakup of the nation between the Catholic South and the Protestant North. Ireland had first become a territory of the wider Anglo-Norman establishment during the 12th century following the Norman conquest of England, with the first landings taking place in May 1169, when certain Irish chiefs asked for assistance from the Norman barons in their feuds with neighbouring overlords, only finding out too late that the Normans would not leave once their work had been done, and thus captured large swathes of the country. By the 1600s, Ireland was divided among native Irish chiefs, who held a majority of the country, while Anglo-Irish lords claimed earldoms in the southwest and northeast, the only part of Ireland held formally by the English crown being the region around Dublin, known as the Pale. Rule of Ireland was one based on an uneasy peace, with sporadic wars erupting across the centuries between the Irish chiefs and the English settlers. Starting in 1606, under a colonisation carried out by King James I of England and the VI of Scotland, Protestant settlers were allowed to establish plantations in the Ulster region of Northern Ireland on land confiscated from the native Irish, this move creating bitter resentment not only because of the forced evictions, but also due to the settlers being of the Protestant faith of Christianity, while the Irish natives were devout Catholics. Rising tensions between the two sides culminated in the 11 Years' War, which took place as the English crown was distracted by the civil war between Charles I's royalists and Oliver Cromwell's parliamentarians. Following the parliamentarian victory in the Second English Civil War during August 1648, wherein the defeated King Charles I was executed, Cromwell rose to the rank of Lord Protector of the Republican Commonwealth of England, and subsequently launched a conquest of Ireland in August 1649 so as to brutally put down the Irish Rebellion. In a vicious campaign, which lasted nearly 4 years, Cromwell brought Ireland firmly under English rule, his methods to suppress the Irish including the widespread confiscation of lands and the slaughter of thousands, most notably in Drogheda and Wexford, as he sought to root out the Catholic influence. In the wake of this upheaval came famine and disease, which swept through the devastated nation and added further to the death toll, while those who survived faced deportation to the colonies of North America and the Caribbean as indentured labourers. With Ireland now largely secure, it would eventually be merged into the wider United Kingdom under the Act of Union in 1800, creating the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland. However, stirring hatred and nationalist sentiment against the British simmered only just beneath the surface, fueled further by the putting down of the United Irishmen Rebellion of 1798 and the infamous Great Famine of 1845 to 1851, which saw millions either starve to death or emigrate to North America, all while Irish dairy products and wheat were exported to Britain and the colonies. By the 1880s, hostility against continued rule of Ireland from London had resulted in open cries for some kind of severance when it came to the governing of the nation by the British, nationalists in the Irish Parliamentary Party, or IPP, demanding that Ireland be allowed self-government in Dublin rather than being at the whim of the British Parliament in Westminster. On the other hand, more fringe organisations, such as Arthur Griffith's Sinn Féin, argued for complete independence from British rule, though by this point the general consensus among the Irish political class was that only self-governance was the priority, remaining at the very least a commonwealth of the British Empire should their demands be met. Eventually, the British government agreed to Home Rule in 1912, but due to the deep-seated mistrust between the primarily Protestant settlers in the north and the Catholic majority in the south, the threat of potential violence between these two factions had to be resolved before this could be granted. In response, both sides set up paramilitary organisations to protect themselves should Home Rule not be decided on satisfactory terms, the Ulster Unionists forming a Protestant defence force, while in the south, the Catholic Irish created their own nationalist military organisation, the Irish Volunteers. Thus, it was clear that should Home Rule be granted, civil war between the two sides would be almost inevitable, and as a consequence, the British Parliament passed the Third Home Rule Act, with an amending bill that called for the partition of Ireland that was introduced by the Ulster Unionists, though this act's implementation was postponed by the outbreak of the First World War in August 1914. In order to keep the British on side, so as to get the best deal when it came to Home Rule once the war had ended, the Irish nationalist leadership, as headed by John Redmond, followed the IPP in supporting Britain in its effort against the Central Powers of Europe, with Irish regiments fighting as part of the British Army. However, there was still a sizable portion of the Irish volunteers who sought not to partake in the war on Britain's side, considering it to be of no concern to Ireland, leading to a split in the volunteer movement between John Redmond's Nationalist Volunteers and Owen McNeill's Irish Volunteers, who prepared to undertake open revolt against the British alongside the separatist Irish Republican Brotherhood. During Easter 1916, the Irish Volunteers declared Ireland a republic and launched their insurrection on April 24th, with an uprising in Dublin seeing widespread destruction and up to 400 people killed when the volunteers engaged in brutal urban warfare against the British soldiers. Led by schoolmaster and Irish language activist Patrick Pearse, alongside the smaller Irish citizen army of James Connolly, around 3,000 Irish volunteers seized strategically important buildings and fought with the British authorities in a week-long battle, the British responding through the dispatch of 16,000 men, together with field artillery and a gunboat, to the centre of Dublin. In the vicious confrontation, hundreds were killed as the British sought to drive the Irish nationalists from their stronghold inside the General Post Office, most of whom were civilians caught in the crossfire, of which many fell victim to the British shelling of the city centre, the Easter Uprising eventually being put down on April 29th, with the surviving leadership of 15 men being arrested and executed by firing squad. Though the uprising had been crushed, the impact of its stalwart defence against overwhelming British forces, together with the execution of its leaders, galvanised support for the separatist Sinn Féin party. The British authorities declared martial law, which resulted in arbitrary punishments against the Irish population and the establishment of concentration camps for suspected nationalist sympathisers, thus robbing the British of any support in their war effort against the Central Powers. The final straw came in April 1918, where in the wake of the German Spring Offensive, which saw large swathes of the British front line captured in Belgium, the authorities in London attempted to introduce conscription into Ireland, combined with Home Rule outlined at the Irish Convention, leading to mass demonstrations during the conscription crisis of 1918. In November of the same year, a general election among Irish voters illustrated their disapproval of British policy by giving Sinn Féin 70% of the vote, with the victorious party pledging to establish a dedicated Irish Parliament in Dublin rather than answering to Westminster, creating what was known as the First Dáil Éireann at Mansion House on January 21, 1919. As its first move, the Dáil reaffirmed the 1916 Declaration of Independence and issued a statement proclaiming that a state of war existed between England and Ireland, the Irish Volunteers being reconstituted as the Irish Republican Army or IRA, and was perceived to have been given a mandate by the Dáil to conduct war on the British administration. While Sinn Féin had not stated in their 1918 manifesto their intention to conduct military action against the British as part of their pursuit of independence, on the day of the First Dáil's convention at Mansion House in January 1919, the opening action of the Irish War of Independence took place when IRA members ambushed and killed 2 Royal Irish Constabulary officers who were escorting explosives. In response to the killings, the British government declared South Tipperary a special military area under the Defence of the Realm Act 2 days later, and though war had not officially been declared by the Dáil Éireann, IRA volunteers began to attack British government property and targeted and killed prominent members of the British administration. In terms of how the war was to be conducted, some Republican leaders, notably Eamon de Valera, proposed the undertaking of pitched battles against the British so as to legitimise the new republic in the eyes of the world. Realistically, however, based on the limited resources and numbers of the IRA, it was more practical to conduct guerrilla warfare, as per the likes of the Boers in South Africa, with fast but highly damaging raids being carried out by men not in uniform. Initially, the violence of the IRA was not looked upon favourably by the Irish population, though from 1919 to mid-1920, the actual fighting between the British Army and the IRA volunteers was very limited, the nationalist campaign being more to undermine British rule through insurgent strikes and general civil disobedience. The IRA's main target was the Catholic Irish Police Force, officially known as the Royal Irish Constabulary, or RIC, which acted as the British government's main representation within the Irish population. Comprising 9,700 men stationed at 1,500 barracks across the country, the RIC was placed front and centre as a symbol of British oppression by the Dáil, on April 11, 1919, and through a highly successful campaign of ostracism, turned the regular population against the police force, with the families of officers being targeted for harassment due to their perceived betrayal of the Irish people. This therefore resulted in the widespread resignation of officers from the RIC, while those who remained in its ranks were either denied all service by shop owners and businesses, leading to the not uncommon sight of RIC officers being reduced to demanding food and other basic items at gunpoint, or chose to side with the Republicans in their cause out of fear or secret loyalty, providing significant information and weapons to the rebels. Alongside the military campaign of the IRA and the smearing of the RIC among the Irish populace, other forms of disruption came with widespread strike action, as per a general strike called in April 1919 by the Limerick Trades and Labour Council, in protest of a special military area under the Defence of the Realm Act being declared for most of Limerick City, which demanded the issuing of special permits by the RIC for people to enter the city. This was followed in May 1920 by the Dublin dock workers refusing to handle the transfer of war materials at the shipyard, and the Irish Transport and General Workers Union banned railway drivers from carrying British forces, leading to the introduction of English train drivers to work in their stead. The railway strike lasted until December 1920, when the British government threatened to cut off grants to the Irish companies, but was still able to severely cripple the movement of British troops up and down the country. It was in 1920, though, that the IRA, having consolidated their weapons and forces, began their violent campaign in earnest, attacking isolated RIC stations in rural areas that saw them abandoned as the police retreated to larger towns, with up to 400 barracks being evacuated by the RIC and subsequently burned by the IRA to prevent their reuse. The RIC was also being disrupted within the legal system, as when attempting to conduct trials for captured IRA volunteers, jurors refused to attend and thus led to a collapse of the court structure, this only serving to demoralize RIC officers who continued to resign en masse. As the British-controlled RIC fell, the Dáil established its own police force in the form of the Irish Republican Police, or IRP, as led by former IRA Chief of Staff Cathal Brugha, this organisation enforcing the rule of the Dáil courts as set up under the Irish Republic. By the end of 1920, the IRP maintained a presence in 21 of Ireland's 32 counties, and the Irish people were encouraged by the Dáil to stop paying taxes and instead contribute to a national loan that would help fund both the IRA and the foundling government, ultimately leading to £380,000, or £13.9 million in 2023, being raised by the Irish population, plus a further $5 million from prominent Irish Americans in the United States who sought the creation of an Irish Republic. Only helping to assist the IRA in their movement was the heavy-handed response of the British, with the armed forces often resorting to arbitrary reprisals against Republican activists in the civilian population. Such was the case in September 1919, when 200 British soldiers looted and burned the main businesses in Fermoy, County Cork, after one of their number had been killed in an arms raid by the local IRA. In total, by mid-1920, British forces had carried out 38,720 raids on private homes, arrested 4,982 suspects, committed 1,604 armed assaults, carried out 102 indiscriminate shootings and burnings of towns and villages, and killed 77 people, including women and children. The most controversial was the assassination of Thomas McCurtain, the Sinn Féin Lord Mayor of Cork, who was shot dead in front of his wife at his home in March 1920 by men seen returning to the local police barracks. The main driving force behind the independence movement was Michael Collins, nominally the Minister of Finance in the Republic's government and IRA Director of Intelligence, who was actively involved in providing funds and arms to the IRA units that needed them, Collins being a man of natural intelligence, organizational capability, and a passion for the cause that helped to unify those around him. He was therefore able to set up an effective and widespread network of spies within the Dublin Metropolitan Police's, or DMP's, G Division, and other important branches of the British administration, the G Division being specifically tasked with countering the Republican movement. Collins's squad was able to actively seek out and assassinate members of G Division from July 1919 onward, although he was willing to offer them safe passage out of Ireland if they resigned beforehand. In essence, the likes of Collins and IRA Chief of Staff Richard Mulcahy were the active arms of Minister of Defence in the Dáil, Cathal Brugha, with local operations being delegated to guerrilla leaders Liam Lynch, Tom Barry, Sean Moylan, Sean McCowan, and Ernie O'Malley, who worked with their own initiative, the main focus of IRA activities being in Munster and Dublin, with only isolated active IRA units elsewhere. However, though on paper the IRA had up to 100,000 volunteers, in reality the group was only able to muster 15,000 men over the course of the war, while a standing army of only 3,000 men was available at any one time during the conflict, although these were heavily supported by organisations such as the Cumann na Ban, or the Irish Women's Group, or the Fine Éireann, or the Youth Movement, who provided lodgings and food for regular IRA members, as well as smuggling weapons and gathering intelligence. Therefore, with the overall support of the Irish population, who refused to divulge information to the RIC or the British Army, as well as providing safe houses and supplies to IRA operatives, the organisation could mount a highly successful guerrilla campaign, spurred on further by the heavy-handed response of the British authorities to IRA activities. The only real critic of IRA activities within the high-ranking Irish leadership was Eamon de Valera, who returned from the United States and demanded that ambushes and assassinations cease, as these were portraying the movement for Irish independence as violent terrorists rather than crusaders for freedom, his proposals being immediately rejected by those around him. In truth, the excessive response of the British military authorities served the cause of the IRA far better than their open warfare against the RIC and the army, with the 7,000-strong Black and Tans being established in January 1920 using demobilised troops from the front lines of World War I. Arriving in March 1920, the men recruited were primarily of English and Scottish origin, and were officially designated under the auspices of the RIC, even though in reality they were a paramilitary force. The Black and Tans rapidly gained a reputation for drunkenness and ill discipline that resulted in yet more harm to the perception of the British rule in Ireland, worsened still by their burning of numerous small towns throughout Ireland, including Balbriggan, Trim, and Templemore, in response to IRA activities during the summer of 1920. In July 1920, another quasi-military police body dubbed the Auxiliaries, consisting of 2,215 former British Army officers, arrived in Ireland, this division also gaining a rapid reputation for their mistreatment of the civilian population, but were far more effective in combating the threat of the IRA. Regardless, the actions of the Black and Tans and the Auxiliaries led to a slew of criminal cases being filed against their operatives due to their excessive and vicious reprisals against the Irish people, the number of warrants being served seeing the passing of the Restoration of Order in Ireland Act on August 9, 1920, which suspended all coroners' courts and replaced them with military courts of inquiry. In addition, the powers of military court-martials were extended to cover the whole population, and were empowered to use the death penalty and internment without trial, while government payments to local authorities in Sinn Féin hands were suspended, these moves only serving to widen the confrontation, and violence rapidly increased between November 1920 and July 1921. By this point, the actions of the British in Ireland were universally condemned across the globe, while those of Irish descent serving within the wider British Empire made clear their opposition, as was the case when a large-scale mutiny broke out among the Irish Connaught Rangers stationed in India, which led to 2 men being killed whilst trying to storm an armoury, and a third being executed by firing squad. The campaign against the British wasn't just through violent protest, with hunger strikes also being used as a weapon to gain sympathy on the global stage, with the Lord Mayor of Cork, Terence McSweeney, starving himself to death in Brixton Prison, London, during October 1920, followed by 2 IRA prisoners, Joe Murphy and Michael Fitzgerald, dying of starvation in Cork Jail. On November 21, 1920, an extremely violent event occurred when an IRA squad assassinated various members of what was known as the Cairo Gang, a group of British intelligence operatives who gathered information on IRA activities. This spate of shootings across Dublin, leaving 14 dead and 5 wounded, including British Army officers, policemen and civilians. In response, the Auxiliaries, during a football match at Croke Park, drove onto the pitch in lorries and began firing randomly into the crowd of spectators, killing 14 and injuring 65, one of whom was football player Michael Hogan, who was shot when he attempted to intervene. Elsewhere, prisoners Dick McKee, Peter Clancy and Conor Clune, the latter of whom was not an IRA operative, were killed in Dublin Castle while reportedly attempting to escape, though it was revealed that they had in fact been tortured to death, the violence of November 21, 1920, now being known as Bloody Sunday. Only a week later, on November 28, an IRA unit ambushed a patrol of auxiliaries at Kilmichael in County Cork, killing 17 of the 18-man troop, and thus, in response, the British authorities implemented martial law in the counties of Cork, Kerry, Limerick, and Tipperary from December 10th. From January 1921, official reprisals were sanctioned as part of the British pacification of the Irish rebels, giving the Black and Tans and the auxiliaries official permission to burn towns and villages in response to IRA actions, as demonstrated on December 11, 1920, when the centre of Cork was burned by British forces, who promptly had firefighters shot when they attempted to extinguish the blaze. With both sides now no longer showing restraint, open warfare between the IRA and the British tore the Irish nation apart for 8 long months, during which 1,000 people, including RIC police, British military, IRA volunteers and civilians, were killed, representing 70% of all casualties for the entire 3-year conflict, while 4,500 IRA personnel were arrested, and the Dáil formally declared war on Britain from March 1921. On March 19, 1921, Tom Barry, leading a 100-strong unit of IRA operatives, launched a large-scale attack on 1,200 British troops during what was known as the Crossbarry Ambush, leading to a running battle that saw 30 British killed, followed 2 days later by Barry's men attacking a troop train at Headford Junction near Killarney that led to another 20 British deaths. Barry's audacious campaign was coupled to dozens of small-scale ambushes and assaults that took place across the country, usually comprising the individual murder of British troops and members of the RIC, though these often didn't go to plan and were very costly in members, with many IRA operatives not surviving these skirmishes as they struggled to escape. On May 25, 1921, the IRA undertook a symbolically significant, though tactically futile, operation by burning the Custom House in Dublin, the main centre for the local government in Ireland, the destruction of the Custom House being an extremely costly move, with 5 IRA volunteers killed and over 80 others captured, despite its visual and political symbolism, which demonstrated that British rule in the country was untenable. It also demonstrated that the IRA could not partake in pitched battle against the British due to their lack of equipment and training, though it did not, as is sometimes claimed, cripple the IRA in Dublin, with attacks carried out by the Dublin Brigade continuing into June 1921. Unfortunately, what was hoped to be a simple and swift expulsion of the British from Ireland had dragged on for 3 long years, and with the British authorities tightening their grip on the nation, weapons and supplies were running drastically short, and the IRA was on the brink of total collapse as they struggled to unseat their opponents. With the possibility of defeat looming, Michael Collins proposed taking the war to Britain by launching a military campaign in England and Scotland, suggesting a possible uprising in Glasgow against British rule in Scotland, while also bombing locations of major economic significance such as Liverpool docks, which had seen 19 warehouses burned already by the IRA. The British Parliament passed the Government of Ireland Act in December 1920, which attempted to solve the conflict by creating 2 Home Rule parliaments in Ireland, one in Northern Ireland and one in Southern Ireland, though this was ignored by the Dáil Éireann, who considered the Irish Republic to already be in existence, while the Unionists in the northeast accepted this proposal. The reasons for this are essentially a continuation of the original war fought between the Protestant colonists of the 1600s and the dispossessed Catholics of the south, IRA violence in northeast Ireland, specifically Belfast, reflecting this sectarianism fueled by a deep-seated hatred of the Catholic minority against Protestant majority, thus meaning the war waged by the IRA in Northern Ireland was less for the removal of British rule and more an excuse to exterminate the Protestants. Seeing themselves as being besieged by armed Catholic nationalists, the Protestants were firmly in favour of retaining union with Britain as a means of protecting themselves from being driven into the Irish Sea, the Loyalists, representing the Protestants, demanding that more be done to seek reprisals against the IRA for their attacks on the people of Northern Ireland. While initial reprisal action began during June and July 1920 in Derry, in which dozens were killed across a week of intersectarian rioting, the true violence between the Catholics and Protestants began in the spring of 1921, when Northern IRA units came under pressure from their leadership in Dublin to step up attacks in line with the rest of the country. The result was action being taken by the British in response to IRA activities in Northern Ireland, beginning with a statement that for every British soldier or RIC member killed by the IRA, the Catholics would suffer the same, with the Ulster Volunteer Force or UVF, alongside the RIC, being the main perpetrators of these punitive actions. Politically, while Sinn Féin still possessed immense support across Southern Ireland from the general population, elected members refused to take their seats in Westminster, while under the terms of the Government of Ireland Act, the Southern Parliament was dissolved and Southern Ireland was to be ruled as a Crown colony. In response, the IRA, from May 14th to May 15th, killed 15 policemen, these events marking the complete failure of the British coalition government's Irish policy, both in terms of being able to enforce a settlement without negotiating with Sinn Féin, and a failure to defeat the IRA. Eventually, it was clear to both sides that one faction wouldn't be able to overcome the other, despite the fact that neither of them realised how close each other was to defeat. For the British, they had lost nearly all of their support among the Irish population, and whatever the outcome of the war, they would never be able to re-establish a settled government within the nation, while the IRA were down to their last few rounds and would not have survived the remainder of 1921 had the fighting continued. Therefore, on July 11, 1921, a truce was announced between the British and the IRA, the main driving force behind this move being King George V, the Prime Minister of South Africa, General Jan Smuts, and British Prime Minister David Lloyd George. The King was the first to voice his displeasure at the actions of the Black and Tans in Ireland, the monarchy being in an unstable position at the end of World War I, following revolutions in Russia, Germany, and Austro-Hungary that had deposed their respective royal families, King George believing that the cruel reprisals and conduct of the British authorities were a potentially fatal reflection on himself and may have been the catalyst behind a similar revolution in England. General Smuts, as a close personal friend of the King, thereby suggested to him that the opportunity should be used to make an appeal for conciliation in Ireland, and following consultation with Lloyd George and his cabinet, King George delivered a speech on June 22, 1921 in Belfast to universal acclaim, and thus opened channels of communication between the British Parliament and Sinn Féin. Ultimately, Eamon de Valera and David Lloyd George agreed to a truce that was signed on July 9th, and came into effect 2 days later, though despite these calls for an end to the fighting, the IRA took this move as a temporary respite and continued to resupply their forces and recruit additional members, with attacks on the RIC lasting until February 1922, which left 12 officers dead, as well as sectarian violence against the Protestants. Finally, on December 6, 1921, the Anglo-Irish Treaty was signed and ratified in triplicate by the Dáil Éireann, the House of Commons of Southern Ireland, and by both houses of the British Parliament, this treaty allowing Northern Ireland, which had been created by the Government of Ireland Act 1920, to opt out of the Free State if it wished, which it duly did on December 8, 1922, under the procedures laid down. A border was drawn between Northern and Southern Ireland, whereby the 6 counties in the north with a Protestant majority would therefore become the province of Northern Ireland. Meanwhile, a new system of government was created for the Irish Free State, though despite this compromise giving independence to the predominantly Catholic South, not all parties were willing to accept the terms of the Anglo-Irish Treaty, especially the more militant factions who sought the expulsion of the Protestants from the north and the creation of a truly united Ireland. Liam Lynch, a major figure in the IRA, declared that the Dáil and the new Free State government had betrayed the cause of a unified and independent Ireland, and had broken the oath of allegiance to the Irish Republic, which the Dáil had installed on August 20, 1919, the anti-treaty faction being supported by the former President of the Republic, Eamon de Valera, and Ministers Cathal Brugha and Austin Stack. Amid the ongoing violence against the Protestants in the north, anti-treaty IRA operatives rose up in revolt against the newly established Free State government through the capturing of several key public buildings in Dublin during June 1922, and after a breakdown of negotiations, together with isolated pockets of fighting between the two factions, Michael Collins ordered the anti-treaty faction removed by force on June 28th, leading to the start of the Irish Civil War. With a much larger force at their side, the National Army of the Free State government quickly secured Dublin from the rebels, with fighting soon moving into the countryside in a bitter guerrilla campaign that would eventually see the head of the provisional government, Michael Collins, and ex-minister Cathal Brugha killed in action, as well as anti-treaty Republicans Harry Boland, Rory O'Connor, Liam Mellows, Liam Lynch, and many others, the full death toll of the Irish Civil War having never been fully determined, but could possibly have been higher than that of the war against the British. Ultimately, the Irish Civil War ended in May 1923, when the pro-treaty forces achieved victory, and after nearly 2 years of Ireland being essentially ungovernable, W.T. Cosgrave rose to become President of the Executive Council, and the first internationally recognised head of an independent Irish Free State from December 6, 1922. Sadly, the compromises following the Irish War of Independence and the hundreds of years of perceived oppression continue to resonate to this day, as while Ireland is now wealthier and quieter than it has been for centuries, thanks to the Good Friday Agreement of April 10, 1998, there continues to be support in the South for Irish unity and an equal mistrust in the North as to what this unification might entail.